She didn't even say hello. She just looked up, eyes half-lidded, jaw tight, and pointed toward the far end of the lobby, like he was a mistake someone forgot to clean up. "The side entrance is around back," she said, already looking back down at her phone. Jerome Wilson stood still, coat collar turned up, one hand on the handle of his overnight bag. For a second, he thought maybe he'd misheard. Maybe the jazz playing in the lobby drowned her out. But no, she had really just said that. He looked down at himself. Charcoal slacks, navy wool jacket, clean white shirt. No logos, no gym bag, no pizza box. Nothing in his hand but a reservation. And yet, she thought he was here to deliver something. Maybe because he wasn't wearing a $1,000 suit. Maybe because he walked in alone. Or maybe, just maybe, because he was black. "I have a reservation," he said calmly. The woman, Bethany, according to her gold name tag, didn't flinch, didn't blink, just let out a sigh that sounded like it had been saved specifically for people like him. "Then the check-in areas around the side," she said again, "for standard guests." "Standard guests?" Jerome raised an eyebrow. "This is the main lobby." She gave a tight-lipped smile. That wasn't a smile at all. "Yes," she said, "but those rooms are for signature and executive-level guests. You'll be more comfortable at the secondary desk." Jerome stared at her. "Secondary desk?" Bethany nodded. "Yeah, where walk-ins and non-priority guests go." Behind him, a man in a tailored navy suit walked in, white, mid-50s, holding nothing but a phone and a smug expression. Bethany looked up instantly. "Good evening, sir," she chirped. "Welcome back to Lexington Crown. May I get you checked into your suite?" Jerome watched it happen like a rerun. 1 minute, he was invisible. The next, someone else got rolled out the red carpet. No hesitation. No side entrance. Just assumptions. Just power based on pigment. "Tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever been made invisible in plain sight." Jerome cleared his throat, voice low but steady. "Let me try this again. My name is Jerome Wilson. I booked 2 nights, in advance." Bethany's smile dropped half an inch. She clearly didn't appreciate being corrected. "All right," she said curtly, clicking into the system. "Let's see." Her fingers tapped half-heartedly across the keyboard. She squinted at the screen, then shook her head slowly. "No reservation under that name," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Maybe you booked a different Lexington." Jerome didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone, opened the confirmation email, and turned the screen toward her. "Lexington Crown," he said. "Lexington Avenue. Today. Room type. Executive View Suite." Bethany gave it a brief glance and shrugged. "Emails can be wrong," she muttered. "If it's not in the system, it doesn't exist." Jerome nodded slowly, slid his phone back into his coat, and took a quiet breath. Still calm. But beneath that calm, something shifted. Because he was in the system, and he knew it. He stepped a few paces away from the desk and pulled out a second phone. Sleeker. Secured. This one wasn't for social or business meetings. This one was for command. He typed a few commands, logged into the internal admin system, and found what he expected. Reservation. J. Wilson. Confirmed. Timestamp. 6:42 p.m. Status. Manually deleted. Deleted by Bethany. M. His jaw didn't tighten. He didn't roll his eyes or raise his voice. Instead, he smiled. Not the kind of smile you give when something's funny. The kind you give when you've just confirmed someone lied to your face and now you get to do something about it. He walked back to the desk. Bethany was texting again. "Bethany," he said evenly. "What happens when a reservation gets deleted manually?" She looked up, irritated. It's removed, obviously. And who can do that? Front desk staff. Like you? She blinked, suddenly guarded. Yes. Why? Jerome turned the phone toward her. She stared, paused. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I must have... She stammered. Jerome raised a finger. Stop! Bethany froze. He leaned in a little, his voice dropping. You deleted my reservation, Bethany. Without checking, without asking, without a single question. Just gone. It was... You thought I didn't belong here. Bethany's lips quivered just a little. That's not... Don't finish that sentence, Jerome said. You'll regret it. He took a step back, pulled a deep breath, then gave her one last look. Find me a room, right now. Bethany scrambled to the keyboard, hands trembling slightly. Okay. Let's see. She typed faster than before, clearly rattled. Room 1614, she said finally. Deluxe view, Lux. Available now. 1614, Jerome repeated. She nodded. Next to the elevator shaft. Overlooks the dumpster in the back alley. Bethany's face turned red. Jerome smiled. Try again. After another 20 seconds, she finally muttered, Presidential suite, corner view, top floor. Better, he said. She slid the keycard toward him, eyes avoiding his. He didn't pick it up. Tell your manager, he said softly, that Jerome Wilson just checked in and that this location is now under formal review. Bethany blinked, confused. Jerome leaned in just enough for only her to hear. And let him know, he whispered. Clear eval goes live in 48 hours. He picked up the keycard and walked toward the elevators. But this wasn't over. Not even close. The door to room 2617 clicked shut behind Jerome with a soft, sterile thud. He didn't take off his coat, didn't look around. The presidential suite was immaculate, of course. Fresh orchids on the marble credenza, pressed linens, champagne chilling in a hammered silver bucket. All meaningless. He dropped his overnight bag gently on the leather bench, pulled out his laptop, and opened the lid with precision that felt surgical. This wasn't about comfort. This was about control. 3 logins, 2-step verification, 1 quiet exhale. He was in. The clear eval dashboard blinked to life, a living, breathing, nervous system of his entire hospitality empire. From inventory status in Miami to guest complaints in Vancouver, it was all there. Jerome typed filter, property, Lexington Crown, NYC date range, last 6 months, sort by, unresolved guest complaints. The list that appeared didn't surprise him. What surprised him was how long it was. Hundreds of entries. Almost a third of them were tagged priority unaddressed. He clicked open the top entry. Clerk at front desk refused to check me in despite valid reservation. Stated system error and asked me to wait in the side lounge while other guests were escorted upstairs. I was the only guest of color in line. Guest ID 003491. The clerk's initials, BM, Bethany M. He clicked the next one, then another. They all followed a sickeningly familiar pattern. Reservation suddenly missing. Suite downgraded without explanation. Told I didn't meet the profile of the guest the room was meant for. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't just bias. This was policy in disguise. Jerome sat back, mind working faster than his fingers. He navigated to staff records, pulled up internal performance reports. Bethany had been at the Lexington Crown for 4 years. In that time, she'd been the subject of at least 17 formal complaints, most of which had been marked as guest misunderstanding by one man. Mark Denholm, general manager. Jerome narrowed his eyes and pulled up Mark's profile. Mid-50s. Internal notes said he'd stayed on after the sap-nap of Crown into the Wilson Hospitality Group, retained under a transitional clause negotiated by the board. A courtesy. Jerome didn't remember approving that clause. He picked up the room phone, dialed the front desk. A younger male voice answered. "Good evening, Lexington Crown. How can I help you?" "This is Jerome Wilson. I'd like to speak with Mr. Denham. Immediately. Tell him room 261 scene." A pause. "Yes, sir. Right away." Jerome ended the call and closed his laptop. He stood, walked to the window and looked out over the city. From up here, Manhattan looked quiet. Still, like nothing could touch it. But inside this building, rot was setting in. He wouldn't burn the building down. That was easy. He would excise it, like a tumor. 10 minutes later, a soft knock at the door. Jerome turned. Didn't answer immediately. Let the moment hang. Then, come in. The door opened, and in stepped Mark Denham. Tall, pressed suit, close-shaved beard. The kind of man who shook hands too long and smiled just a little too hard. Except tonight, he looked nervous. "Mr. Wilson," he said. Voice pitched higher than it probably was earlier that morning. "I had no idea you were in town." "Clearly," Jerome said, "still by the window. You would have rolled out the good carpet, right?" Mark forced a chuckle. "Of course. We would have. I mean, it's an honor. We've just had some staffing shifts recently, and communication has been—" Jerome held up a hand. Mark stopped talking instantly. Jerome turned slowly, arms crossed, and leaned against the windowsill. "Let me make this easy, Mark," he said. "You've had over 200 unresolved guest complaints in 6 months. A third of those mention discriminatory behavior at the front desk. 17 of those list Bethany M. as the employee in question." Mark blinked. I have looked into most of those. You mark them all as guest misunderstanding." I tried to handle it discreetly. "You tried to bury it?" Mark flushed. "Mr. Wilson, if I may. Bethany's been with the property for years. She has experience. She knows the system. She just needs—" "Training?" Jerome cut in. "That your excuse?" "I believe with the right coaching." Jerome stepped forward. "She deleted my reservation tonight." Dead silence. Mark's face drained of color. Jerome continued. "She looked me up and decided I didn't belong. Didn't even bother to ask for ID. Just removed me from the system. You understand what that means, Mark? I wasn't aware. You weren't aware because you don't look. You don't listen. You don't lead. You just sit in your glass box and nod at the problems until they go away." Mark stammered. "I can fix it." "No," Jerome said sharply. "I'll fix it." He walked to the table, picked up a printed document, freshly compiled from Clear Eval. He handed it to Mark. "This is a list of every unresolved complaint, every staff error you overlooked. Every bias-fueled denial of service under your watch. The board will receive a copy. Legal has already seen it." Mark took the paper like it burned. Jerome stared at him, eyes hard. "You're done here." Mark blinked. "Sir, you're fired. Effective immediately. HR will finalize your exit package by noon. I suggest you don't come back to the building." Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Jerome leaned in just slightly. "You had one job. Protect the guest experience. You turned that into a privilege, not a right, and you protected your staff over your customers." Mark swallowed, eyes darting. "Security will escort you out." Mark turned toward the door like a man walking underwater. He paused just before leaving. "Mr. Wilson, Jerome didn't look up. The door clicked shut. 5 minutes later, Jerome walked through the lobby like nothing had happened. Bethany was gone. The remaining front desk clerks snapped to attention when they saw him. wide-eyed, stiff-backed, holding their breath like he might say their name next. Jerome didn't yell. He didn't need to. He stopped at the desk, looked at the youngest among them, a boy barely 21, freckles still on his cheeks. "What's your name?" Jerome asked. Kevin." Jerome nodded. "Kevin, I want you to remember something." "Yes, sir. The way you treat someone when you think they're nobody. That's the way you'll be remembered when they turn out to be somebody." Kevin blinked hard. "Yes, sir." Jerome looked around the lobby. Guests were watching now, whispering, staring, some recording. Good. Let them see it. He reached for the house phone, dialed a direct line. "This is Wilson," he said. "Activate clear eval audit on this property, full scale. Suspend discretionary authority for all frontline staff. Flag Bethany M. and mark Denholm in the system. Blacklist access. A beat. Also, have Veritas pause the funding release for Phase 2. He hung up, turned to Kevin. "Call up every reservation that was flagged for downgrade in the last 30 days. Find those guests. Comp them. Upgrade their necks to do it tonight." Kevin nodded frantically. Jerome straightened his jacket. Then, without another word, he walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened with a soft chime. As they closed, he caught one last look at the lobby, the same one where he'd been dismissed just hours ago. Only now, everyone saw him, and none of them would forget. The next morning, the sunlight over Lexington Avenue looked like it always did. Golden, filtered through construction scaffolding and glass towers. Down below, taxi horns echoed off brick and steel. Tourists lined up for coffee they didn't really want. The city moved on, but inside the Lexington Crown, everything had changed. Jerome stood in the center of the lobby, sleeves rolled to his forearms, not a security detail or press agent in sight. He didn't need an audience, he needed answers. "Let's start with this," he said, flipping open his leather folder and pulling out a printout. "This guest, Devin Cole. What happened here?" Kevin, the young clerk from the night before, swallowed hard. Devin Cole, right. Booked an executive corner suite for his anniversary. Got downgraded on arrival. Why? Kevin looked down. The front desk said the room had plumbing issues, and that was Bethany's shift. He nodded. "Yes, sir." Jerome clicked his pen. "Follow up?" She left a note in the log that the guest was disruptive and uncooperative. Jerome arched an eyebrow. "Disruptive?" "I looked into it this morning," Kevin added quickly. "He asked why his room was given away. That was it." Jerome didn't respond right away. He turned toward the front windows, watching a couple argue over a subway map. Then he said quietly, "Find Mr. Cole. Today. Upgrade him to penthouse access for his next stay. Send him flowers and a handwritten apology." "Yes, sir." Jerome handed over the paper and reached for another. Next name. Over the next 3 hours, Jerome reviewed 17 guest complaints. Real ones, not the hollow. Thank you for your feedback variety. Each one carried a common thread. They were all people of color. They were all dismissed, downgraded, or ignored. They were all marked as misunderstood. The files weren't just disturbing, they were damning. One woman, Maria Ortega, a Latina school principal from Jersey City, had reserved a weekend spa suite with her sister. Bethany refused to check her in, claiming her ID didn't match her vibe. That was the exact quote in the staff log. Jerome had to read it twice. Another guest, a black surgeon from Baltimore, had booked a suite after performing a 12-hour transplant. He'd been asked if he could prove he was the one paying. Jerome didn't even ask Kevin to explain that one. He just marked the guest as permanent VIP tier. By noon, the quiet audit had turned into a full-scale operation. 3 assistant managers flew in from other properties. It secured the guest database. HR began closed-door interviews. And Jerome? He sat in the hotel cafe, black coffee in hand, laptop open, scrolling through data like a surgeon going through scans. He wasn't looking for mistakes. He was looking for patterns, and he found them. There were 42 flagged incidents in the last 90 days where a guest with a non-white sounding name had a reservation reassigned within 20 minutes of arrival. Suites were marked as out of order without maintenance requests, only to be reassigned within the hour to white guests. Staff used code phrases like wrong profile or guest not aligned in the system logs. Bethany's name was on almost all of them. But she wasn't the only one. 2 other clerks, 1 concierge, and, most damning of all, a senior night supervisor named Kyle Templeton, who'd been quietly reassigned after guest conflicts, but never formally reprimanded. Jerome took notes, marked every name, cross-referenced with training completion, compliance evaluations, guest feedback. This wasn't bad luck. It was learned behavior, culture, protected by silence, reinforced by weak managers, enabled by systems not built to catch it. Until now. By 2 p.m., Jerome called in the assistant GMs into a private boardroom. There were 4 of them, a mix of ages, backgrounds, and departments, all hand-picked for discretion and integrity, all loyal to Jerome. He clicked the remote and brought up a screen. Clear Eval Internal Ethics Dashboard. Lexington Crown. Bars of red flooded the display. "Let me be blunt," Jerome said, pacing slowly. "This hotel has failed every internal integrity marker we use. Guest mistreatment, identity-based downgrades, staff manipulation of reservations. It's systemic. No one said a word. I didn't come here to fire a receptionist. I came here to expose a culture. And now that we've seen it, we don't bury it, we fix it." One of the GMs, a woman named Natalie, leaned forward. "How wide do we go?" "All 27 properties," Jerome replied. "Effective tonight?" There was a pause. Another GM, the youngest, hesitated. "That'll trigger protocol freeze flags at Veritas. You sure you want that heat right now?" Jerome nodded. "Let it freeze." Later that afternoon, Jerome returned to the lobby. This time, he wasn't watching. He was being watched. Guests glanced up. A woman whispered to her husband. One of the bellhops gave him a quick, respectful nod. Jerome approached a woman sitting quietly in the lounge, reading a paperback. Her posture was tired. Her suitcase had an airline tag from Atlanta. She was dressed simply, but with care. Matching earring, pressed blouse, a wide-brimmed hat folded neatly on the seat beside her. Jerome recognized her from the flagged log. Name, Bernice Holloway. Age, 72. Flagged last month as non-cooperative when she refused to switch from a king suite to a standard queen room due to overbooking. Translation, they gave her suite away when they saw her walk in. Jerome cleared his throat. "Ms. Holloway?" She looked up, cautious. "Yes." He smiled gently. "My name is Jerome Wilson. I just wanted to say you weren't wrong. You were mistreated. And it wasn't your fault." Her face shifted slowly. Surprise giving way to suspicion. Then something close to grief. She looked away. "I just wanted to spend my birthday in a room with a bathtub," she said softly. "That's all. I didn't want to fight." Jerome pulled out a card and placed it on the table. "Next time, you'll have the whole floor." She looked at the card. Executive Board Contact, Jerome A. Wilson, Owner. Her hand trembled just slightly as she held it. Jerome started to turn. Then she said, Do people like you ever get tired? He stopped, tired of fixing what shouldn't be broken in the first place. Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, but not today." He nodded and walked away. Back upstairs, Jerome stood once more in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. The city kept moving. So would he. Tomorrow, the Veritas board would wake up to a formal ethics freeze across 3 chains. $480 million in ESG capital would be locked. CEOs would scramble. Lawyers would call. But tonight, he'd made someone feel seen. And in this business, that's where everything started. The email was only 12 words long. Jerome Wilson has activated ethics freeze across the Veritas portfolio. Effective now. It dropped into inboxes at 7:46 a.m. Eastern, and by 7:49, the first boardroom panic had begun. In Los Angeles, a VP of operations spilled her coffee across a $14,000 mahogany table. In Miami, a general manager ripped his tie off in the middle of a morning briefing. In Geneva, a CFO cursed so loudly in French that his assistant dropped her iPad. Because the name Jerome Wilson didn't just mean hospitality, it meant compliance. And when Jerome moved, money froze. Back in New York, Jerome stood at the center of the Lexington Crown's 8th floor executive boardroom. The windows overlooked the skyline. But his eyes were locked on a large flat screen displaying a live heat map. Red markers were spreading across 27 hotel properties. Ethics freeze status, active Veritas ESG. Holding, $480,000 suspended. An assistant entered the room holding a tablet. "Sir, we've received 12 callback requests from regional directors. Do you want to take any?" Jerome didn't look away from the screen. "No," he said. "Should I tell them when you'll be available?" He turned slightly, voice calm. "Tell them I'll talk when they're ready to listen." The assistant nodded and backed out. Jerome turned back to the screen. This wasn't just about Lexington Crown anymore. It was about everyone who had gotten comfortable hurting people in quiet ways and thinking no one would notice. He clicked through internal dashboards. 3 chains had already triggered automated compliance warnings. Sterling and Gray. 42 unresolved complaints across 5 cities. Harbor Point Suites. Downgrading rate for non-white guests, 2.8x higher, Valmont signature. Profile mismatch tags used 76 times in 90 days. 3 chains. All partners, all about to bleed. By 9:15 a.m., Jerome was on his second espresso when his personal phone buzzed. Caller ID, Nadira Cole. "Chairwoman, Veritas ESG Fund," he answered. "Jerome," Nadira's voice was crisp, British, and loaded with urgency. "You're causing an earthquake." "Good," he replied. Earth needed shaking. "You understand this is $480 million we're talking about. I understand exactly what it is." Silence. Then, "Walk me through it." Jerome paced slowly as he spoke, each word deliberate. Systemic denial of service based on race and perceived class. Covered up by managers, enabled by outdated hiring. I have proof, timestamps, guest logs, and witness statements. I've uploaded it all to the ethics core. You'll see the file named "Disrespect Has a Pattern." Another pause. Then Nadira exhaled. "Christ, you really did your homework. Don't act surprised. I'm not. I'm impressed. Just bracing." Jerome stopped at the window, looking out over the city. "I'm not asking Veritas to cut ties," he said. "I'm asking them to demand better." Nadira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Let me guess. You already have a proposal." He smiled faintly. "I do." By noon, The Lexington Crown's lobby was more tense than usual. Reporters had caught wind of something happening at the flagship property. 2 suited men lingered near the entrance with folded notebooks. Staff whispered. Guests leaned into the tension like it was theatre. Jerome stepped into the center of the lobby. Behind him, 2 Cleary Val auditors flanked the desk, quietly collecting data. He walked to the front counter, the same one where he'd been told to use the side entrance just 36 hours ago, and tapped twice. Kevin, the young clerk, looked up. "Mr. Wilson, gather the staff. All of them. All of them." 10 minutes later, the entire Lexington Crown team, front desk, housekeeping, kitchen, concierge, security, stood in a loose circle around the marble floor. Jerome didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My name," he said, "is Jerome Wilson, and I'm not here to give a speech." Everyone fell silent. "I'm here to explain why this building and 3 others like it just lost access to $480 million in investment." Mouths opened. Heads turned. Someone gasped. Jerome continued. "Because this hotel didn't just mistreat a guest, it mistreated many." He turned slightly, eyes scanning the staff. "And not by accident, not by glitch, by choice." A concierge in the back swallowed hard. Jerome held up a paper. "This is the new ethics accord. Every employee in this building and every other building we fund will sign it." He passed it to Kevin. "If you can't live up to it, you don't work here. If you think guests should be categorized by their skin or clothes or accent, this won't be your home." No one moved. Jerome nodded once. "This isn't about checking boxes. This is about remembering one thing. People remember how you made them feel." Then, quieter, "I remember too." He turned and walked away. At 2:32 p.m., Veritas ESG Fund issued a joint statement co-signed by Jerome. Effective immediately, all Veritas-backed hospitality brands will adopt the Guest Dignity Accord, a binding ethics compliance framework developed in partnership with Wilson Hospitality Holdings. Failure to comply will result in permanent removal from ESG eligibility and funding access. That evening, Jerome sat alone at the rooftop bar. No tie, shirt sleeves rolled, glass of mineral water sweating beside him. The sun was setting, low, gold, and quiet. He didn't feel victorious. He felt something else, like closure. Not just for him, for every guest who had been ignored, downgraded, dismissed. For every person who'd been told with fake politeness and tight smiles that they didn't belong. An elderly couple approached the bar. The woman smiled. "Excuse me, are you the gentleman who—" Jerome shook his head gently. "Just someone who used to be invisible here," he said. "Not anymore." She smiled wider. "Thank you for what you did." Jerome nodded, then turned back to the skyline. No headlines, no applause, just dignity. Restored. The email blast hit every major outlet by 7 o'clock a.m. Subject: Veritas freezes 480 Mounders over ethics scandal. CEO Jerome Wilson speaks out. In Times Square, his face was on the Reuters screen. In London, BBC played a voice clip from his statement. And in LA, a podcast was already calling him the ethics tsunami. Jerome Wilson, the man they once ignored at check-in, had now triggered a financial reckoning. And everyone was watching. Inside a penthouse conference room at Harbor Point Corporate HQ in Chicago, the CEO, Reece Garland, looked like he hadn't slept. He was the man behind one of the 3 frozen chains, once called the Hospitality Wunderkind. Reese had built Harbour Point into a 900-miler brand with sleek beach properties and clever social media. But today, he was sweating through a $3,000 dress shirt, facing a silent board, a blinking Zoom light, and one name on the call that made him nervous. Jerome A. Wilson. "Jerome," Reese began, voiced tight. "I just want to say up front, we're taking this seriously." Jerome didn't smile. "I hope you're not just taking it seriously now," he replied. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. This was ignored. Reese held up a printed memo. "We've already begun implementing internal audits, DEI retraining. We've suspended 5 staff." Jerome's tone was cool. "And how many of those suspensions came before the funding freeze?" Silence. Reese shifted. "Look, I get it, we messed up, but you didn't have to take it this far." "I did," Jerome cut in, "because people like you don't move until money does." Someone on the call inhaled sharply. "Probably legal." Jerome kept going. "Calm, measured, surgical. I had a guest at Lexington Crown last month, a 72-year-old woman. Denied her room because the clerk didn't like how she looked. I had surgeons, professors, veterans, told they didn't belong." "You think this is just one property?" Reese tried again. "We'll sign the accord. We'll do the audit. We'll cooperate fully." Jerome leaned forward slightly, just enough to land the blow. "You're not cooperating. You're catching up. Then, I'll lift the freeze when you publish the guest equity data publicly, by city, by staff, by quarter. Not a PDF. A dashboard. Transparent. Searchable." Reese blinked. "That's aggressive." "That's the bare minimum." The screen fell silent. Then, slowly, Reese nodded. "All right, you'll have it by next week. You'll have it by Friday," Jerome said. Click. Call ended. Back in New York, Jerome closed his laptop and sat back in his chair. No gloating, no satisfaction, just a long, quiet exhale. He picked up a pen and scribbled something in his notebook. Power without accountability is theatre. At 10:17 a.m., a knock at his suite door. He opened it to find Natalie Cho, one of his most trusted regional GMs. Korean-American, early 40s, sharp as a razor, and 10 times more patient than Jerome would ever be. "Morning," she said, holding 2 coffees. He took one. "How bad is it?" She handed him a folder. "We've had 37 interview requests. CNN, CBS, even Trevor Noah's podcast." Jerome snorted. "Let them guess. And Nadira wants you on the Veritas Town Hall. Friday." He sipped. "Tell her I'll send a video." Natalie sat across from him. "Some people are saying you're going too far." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "And what do you say?" She shrugged. "I think you're finally making the rest of the industry catch up to what we've known all along. You're not too far ahead. You're just on time." He looked at her, grateful, then quieter. "I'm not trying to be famous. I know. I just want to make it so nobody gets told to use the side entrance ever again." She smiled. "Well, so far you've made it very expensive to try." That afternoon, Jerome stepped into a side conference room on the 3rd floor. There was no press here, no staff, just a handful of people sitting quietly around a long wooden table. Former guests, guests who had filed complaints, who'd been downgraded, denied, ignored. A black couple from Baltimore, a Latina nurse from the Bronx, an elderly veteran from Alabama, a woman with a stutter who said no one would ever look her in the eye at check-in. Jerome stood at the front. No PowerPoint, no microphone. "Thank you for coming," he said. They nodded. "I know you didn't expect anything to happen when you filed those complaints," Maybe you didn't even expect anyone to read them. The nurse nodded slowly. We've all been told it's just how things are. Jerome stepped forward. I'm here to say it doesn't have to be. He looked at them, one by one. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't imagining things. You were mistreated. And for that, I'm sorry, not just as a CEO, as a man who's felt it too. The room was quiet, but not cold. He walked over, handed each of them a black envelope. Inside is a letter and a key. You've been upgraded to permanent VIP status across every Wilson hospitality property for life. Eyes widened. Someone whispered, Seriously? Jerome nodded. We talk a lot about loyalty programs in this business, but we never talk about our loyalty to you. The veteran smiled. Son, nobody's ever said it like that before. Jerome smiled back. They will now. At 6:15 p.m., Jerome stood alone in the elevator, heading back to the rooftop. He didn't check his phone, didn't scroll Twitter. He just watched the floor numbers tick upward. And when the doors opened, he stepped into the golden light of sunset, the same view that had once been denied to so many. He walked to the railing, looked out, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence is what real power sounds like. 3 days after Jerome Wilson froze $480 million in ESG funding, the headlines hadn't stopped. The man who made the industry blink. The Atlantic, Jerome Wilson isn't playing chess. He built the board. Forbes, a quiet revolution in hospitality. NPR. Social media was a firestorm. LinkedIn was calling him a visionary. Twitter was calling him King Wilson. Cable news anchors tried to summarize a story they barely understood. But Jerome, he didn't give a single interview, didn't go live, didn't tweet, didn't even release a full statement. He just kept moving. That morning, he stepped into a private room at the Veritas Ethics Roundtable, an invite-only summit held once a year, usually filled with executives looking to polish their brands and give vague speeches about inclusion and transparency. This time, there was no room for vague. Jerome walked in wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, and the same quiet, steady expression that had become his signature. His team flanked him, silent but sharp. Nadira Cole, chairwoman of Veritas, stood at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, you've all read the headlines. But let's be clear, today isn't about PR, it's about accountability. And the man who forced that conversation isn't here to charm you, he's here to change you. Then she stepped aside. Jerome took the podium. No notes, no script, just presence. You know who I am, he said. So let me talk about who I used to be. The room stilled. I was a teenage bellhop at a beach hotel in South Carolina. I wore hand-me-down shoes and smiled until my cheeks hurt. I carried bags heavier than me, got called boy more times than I can count. He looked up, scanned the room. And the first time I watched a guest like me get turned away from a suite they paid for, I told myself, one day, I'll own the place. A murmur rippled through the room. I didn't want power to flex it. I wanted power to protect. He paused. Last week, I walked into one of my own hotels, the Lexington Crown, and I was told to use the side entrance. Some people shifted in their seats, others looked down. I didn't announce who I was. I didn't threaten lawsuits. I just watched how easily a person could be erased. Again. He let the silence breathe. I didn't freeze $480 million to punish companies. I froze it to wake them up. Because here's the truth. Discrimination isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like, sorry, we're fully booked. Or You might be more comfortable somewhere else. Or, the system says your reservation's gone. He leaned slightly forward. Well, I built the system, and now I'm rebuilding it. 30 minutes later, the room gave him a standing ovation. But Jerome didn't stay. He slipped out the back into the hallway and let the applause echo behind him like background noise. Natalie met him outside the conference doors. CNN just called again, she said. They're asking for an exclusive. No, Jerome said. Even just a quote? He shook his head. Let them speculate. The work speaks. She smirked. You know you're a nightmare for every PR firm in the country, right? He smiled faintly. Good. Meanwhile, back at the Lexington Crown, the changes had started to land like aftershocks. The side entrance Bethany had once pointed Jerome toward? Gone. Sealed. Rebuilt into a glass atrium with full accessibility. A new sign above the main lobby doors read, All guests, no exceptions. Every front desk agent now wore a silver pin on their lapel. Dignity first. A symbol of the guest ethics accord they'd signed 48 hours prior. And the staff? They were different too. Not because they were afraid, but because for the first time they understood what they represented. Upstairs, Jerome returned to his suite, poured himself a cup of black coffee and turned on the TV. Every network had his name on the ticker. He changed the channel to a documentary on architecture. The voiceover said, A strong foundation doesn't shout. It holds the weight without needing credit. He liked that. He turned the sound off and opened his email. One message stood out. Subject, apology. From a former employee. From Bethany M. Time, 203A. M, he clicked. Mr. Wilson. You have no reason to read this, but I needed to say something. What I did wasn't just unprofessional, it was small. I thought I was protecting standards, but really, I was protecting bias. You didn't scream at me. You didn't shame me. You let the system do that. And it did. I've lost a lot this week. But I'm starting to understand what I've gained too. A mirror. So, thank you for not letting me stay blind. I'll be better. That's all I can promise. Bethany? Jerome stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. Didn't reply. Some lessons didn't need to be acknowledged. They just needed to land. That night, Jerome took the elevator down to the lobby. He stood there quietly, watching guests check in, families laugh. An older couple get walked to their room by a concierge who held the wife's arm like she was royalty. He leaned against a marble pillar and just watched. Not as the CEO, not as the reformer, just as a man who once didn't belong here, and now belonged without permission. Kevin, the young clerk, spotted him and waved. Jerome gave him a nod, subtle but proud. Then he turned, walked out into the night. No press, no escort, just the sound of his shoes on the sidewalk and a quiet truth in his chest. They never saw him coming, but now they'd never forget. By Friday morning, Jerome had already reviewed 12 internal audit reports, 2 updated compliance frameworks, and 1 ethics proposal from a national hotel association. He hadn't replied to a single one, not because he didn't care, but because he knew exactly what silence could do. At 9:03 a.m., a headline hit the Financial Journal. Industry backlash. Executives call Jerome Wilson's freeze disruptive and unreasonable. At 10:17 a.m., CNBC aired a segment with a former Wyndham VP who said, "There's no precedent for what he did. It's economic intimidation, not reform." And by noon, an open letter from 6 major hotel groups was trending on LinkedIn. We support inclusion and equity, but the recent financial tactics weaponize values for personal gain. Jerome read the letter from his office, scrolled once, and tossed his phone on the table. Natalie stood nearby, arms crossed. "You want me to respond?" "No," Jerome said, grabbing a notepad. "They're trying to make noise. We don't need to shout to win." She studied him for a second. "You okay?" He gave a dry chuckle. "This is the easy part. The real heat didn't start until 3:21 p.m. That's when a leaked internal email from the National Hospitality Alliance landed in a reporter's inbox. Subject line: Targeted Response Strategy, Neutralize Jerome Wilson. The content? A 5-point plan to discredit him, including leaking personal financial info, accusing Veritas of bias, highlighting reverse discrimination claims from anonymous employees, launching a third-party audit into Wilson Hospitality's hiring practices, quietly influencing ESG score platforms to downrank him. By 4:00 p.m. the document had gone viral, and suddenly the industry's gentlemen's disagreement turned into a war room. Inside his midtown suite, Jerome sat alone, staring at the ceiling. The leaked email didn't surprise him. He'd seen men like them his whole life, polite in public, vicious behind curtains. Still, something about the phrase "neutralize Jerome Wilson" stuck in his ribs like a knife. Not criticize, not outmaneuver, neutralize. He stood, poured himself water, and turned to the window. New York buzzed outside. But his mind was back in Charleston, a kid with busted sneakers and a mop. Being told to use the back service elevator, he clenched his jaw. They thought they could shame him into silence. But they forgot. He'd been underestimated his whole damn life. Later that evening, Natalie stormed into the room. "You saw the press, right? And the alliance letter. And now they're calling a neutral ethics summit next week in Miami. You're not invited." He raised an eyebrow. "Of course I'm not. They're saying the accord is radical, that it's un-American, that it forces guilt metrics. One guy even said it was economic terrorism." Jerome looked at her calmly. "Then we don't fight back." She blinked. "You're joking." "Nope. We let them talk. Let them panic. Let them hold summits." He stepped closer. "Because while they're shouting into microphones, we're building the new standard." Natalie stared, then slowly nodded. "You're really playing the long game." He smiled faintly. "I'm not playing anything. I'm writing the rule book." Meanwhile, across the country, something strange was happening. Guests began posting stories. I checked into a Crown hotel. The manager walked me to my room personally. First time in years I wasn't asked to verify again just because I'm black. Got offered a bottle of water and an apology for something I didn't even complain about. What's happening? TikToks blew up. Yelp reviews praised sudden kindness. Instagram influencers posted clips of new lobby signage. You belong here. In quiet, visible ways, Jerome's silence became louder than their slander. But not everyone liked the change. At 7:42 p.m., a former VP of Global Stay posted a thread. "Hospitality isn't charity. You don't build loyalty by giving into social pressure." Hatch unapologetic service. The thread went viral for the wrong reason. By midnight, over 90,000 quote tweets buried it in sarcasm, mockery, and guest horror stories. Someone even posted a meme. A hotel clerk blindfolded yelling, "You have a reservation? Not if I can't see your humanity." Caption, the old industry playbook. That weekend, Jerome stayed offline. He wasn't hiding. He was preparing. Because he knew what came next wouldn't be a headline. It would be a decision. Monday morning, 7:58 a.m. His legal advisor handed him a folder. "Everything's finalized." Jerome opened it. Inside, a signed joint agreement between Veritas, Wilson Hospitality, and two of the top 4 ESG platforms. Title, Guest Ethics Compliance Index, Phase 1. Scope: mandatory real-time equity data across 38 hotel brands. Public transparency dashboard updated monthly. Anonymous reporting system for discrimination. Executive accountability tied to ESG scoring. 12-month ethics certification or funding suspension. Jerome flipped to the last page and smiled. I assume they haven't seen this yet. The lawyer shook his head. It drops tomorrow. He nodded. Good. Let them enjoy their summit in Miami. This'll make a nice dessert. Meanwhile, in Miami, the Neutral Summit hosted 2 and 12 industry leaders in a beachfront resort. Linen suits, champagne, PR-friendly panels titled The Future of Fairness. Balancing efficiency with equity. Can inclusion be too expensive? Lots of talk. Zero substance. But just before the closing keynote, someone's phone buzzed. Then another. Then dozens. Push notification. New National Ethics Index launches. Major hotels must comply or lose ESG access. The room froze. Someone whispered, "Is this Wilson again?" Someone else said, "He didn't even show up." And he just outplayed all of us. Back in New York, Jerome stepped out into the spring evening. A light breeze moved through the street. Across the sidewalk, a hotel bellhop, maybe 19, brown-skinned, with hands full of luggage, glanced up and nodded. Jerome nodded back, not because they knew each other, but because they recognized something. The look of someone who's been told no so many times. They started building their own yes. 3 days after the Guest Ethics Compliance Index went live, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, like a change in air pressure before a storm. Then it became impossible to ignore. By Monday morning, 2 global hotel chains quietly signed onto the index, not because they wanted to, but because their ESG credit lines began shrinking, faster than their PR departments could spin it. By Tuesday, 4 regional CEOs reached out to Veritas asking for implementation guidance. And by Thursday, the real quake hit. Carlton Prime, one of the 5 biggest players in luxury hospitality, released a 6-word statement that dropped jaws across the industry. We support the Wilson Index. Fully. It wasn't just a gesture. Carlton had been part of the Miami Summit, one of the loudest skeptics. Their CEO, Bradley Long, had called the accord idealistic disruption less than 2 weeks ago on Bloomberg. Now, Bradley stood in front of microphones flanked by his board and said, "We were wrong, not just about Jerome Wilson, but about what leadership actually looks like in this moment." The fallout was immediate. Stock prices swung. Hotel unions weighed in. Customers demanded to know who else was signing. And the 6 execs who'd penned the open letter against financial coercion? All backtracked publicly. Each one blamed their legal teams. Each one suddenly believed in the need for deeper transparency. Each one wanted a seat at the reform table. Jerome didn't answer any of their calls. Inside his corner office, Jerome watched quietly as CNN ran a live poll. Do you support tying ethics compliance to hotel funding? Yes, 87%. No, 7%. Undecided, 6%. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just turned to Natalie and said, "Get the next phase ready." The next phase wasn't just about hotel chains. It was about who empowered them, the online booking giants, the credit card partners, the real estate brokers, all the invisible systems that enabled quiet bias to flourish unchecked. So at 2:00 p.m., sharp on Friday, Jerome sent one email, exactly 17 words long, to 5 major platforms. We are evaluating your compliance pipeline. Let us know where your ethics monitoring stands. Clock starts now. That was it. No threat, no curse, just a ticking clock, with hundreds of millions of dollars hanging in the air. By the end of the week, Bookright paused partnerships with 8 non-compliant chains. Staveview launched an equity visibility tag powered by Veritas. Globecard, the largest luxury rewards credit platform, added ethics criteria to their annual partner reviews. Every move felt coordinated. Every update felt like a line being drawn. Softly, clearly, irrevocably. But not everyone went quietly. One company refused. Gold Sky Resorts, old money, older mindset. CEO named Edward Baines, who'd built his empire on exclusivity, velvet ropes, and knowing who to let in and who to keep out. When a reporter asked him about the Wilson Index, he smirked. "We don't build our standards off Twitter sentiment, we build them on legacy." And Gold Sky's legacy speaks for itself. Within 48 hours, Veritas's ethics score dropped Gold Sky to non-compliant. Then their ESG credit line froze $92 million. 3 major airports cut partnership lounges. 2 international agencies suspended Gold Sky listings. It was like watching a castle sink by its own weight. And the kicker? Edward Baines still refused to blink. Back in New York, Jerome sat in a downtown cafe sipping tea. He wasn't in his usual tailored suit, just jeans, a button-up, and the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need cologne or headlines. A woman approached. Older, stylish, brown skin, fierce eyes. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know you." He looked up, curious but calm. "I'm a district manager for a travel agency that services high-income black families," she continued. "For years we've dealt with the same nonsense. Lost bookings, weird dress code comments, disappearing suite upgrades." She paused, her voice tight. "But this past week, we had clients who walked into those same places and got respect. You changed that." He nodded slowly. "Not alone," he said. She smiled. "Doesn't matter. You started the shake." Then she handed him a card and walked away. He looked down. The card read, "National Alliance for Travel Equity Upcoming Summit. The new standard speaker slot reserved, Jerome Wilson." Later that night, Jerome walked the halls of one of his own properties. Not the Lexington Crown, but an old resort he'd acquired just last year in Atlanta. It used to be known for exclusivity. Now it was known for access. He watched a father with 2 sons check in. The younger boy pointed at the front desk agent's lapel pin. "Dignity first." "Dad?" the kid asked. "What's that mean?" The father looked up, spotted Jerome, then answered quietly. "It means you're seen, and that matters more than anything." Jerome didn't interrupt, didn't introduce himself. He just stood there, quiet, present, letting that moment anchor itself in memory. As he returned to his suite, Natalie was waiting. "We've got 14 major platforms on board," she said, "and 29 hotel chains either joined or asked for guidance." He nodded. "What about the 3 that still won't play ball?" She handed him a folder. Gold Sky, Summit West, and a boutique chain in Europe, all refusing. Jerome looked through the names, then said softly, "Let them fall behind. The future doesn't wait for permission." The ballroom at the Pacific Equity Forum was lit like a cathedral. Glass walls, velvet curtains, chandeliers the size of pickup trucks. Power brokers from every part of the hospitality world circled each other in tailored suits and $800 shoes. Jerome didn't wear a name tag. He didn't need to. People noticed when he walked in. Edward Baines noticed too. The CEO of Gold Sky stood at the back near a table lined with aged whiskey and false confidence. He caught sight of Jerome and made no move to smile. But Jerome walked straight toward him. "Edward," he said, extending a hand. Edward glanced at it for a second too long, then shook it, firm and cold. "Well, if it isn't the man who's turned the whole industry upside down." Jerome kept his tone even, or maybe just right side up. Edward gave a half laugh, the kind that ends before it begins. "You made your point with the freeze, but you and I both know this won't last. The market doesn't run on morality, it runs on margins. And some of those margins just shrunk by $92 million, Jerome replied. Edward's jaw twitched. Behind them, the host tapped a glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the leadership panel." The stage was simple: 5 chairs, 2 microphones, 1 moderator. Edward and Jerome sat at opposite ends. The moderator began. "We're here to talk about accountability in an evolving marketplace. Mr. Baines, I'd like to start with you." Edward cut him off. "I'll be brief. We believe in legacy. We believe in tradition. And we believe that no external index, especially one designed in a vacuum, should dictate how private companies operate." There were a few polite nods from the old guard in the room. Edward turned slightly toward Jerome. "Now, Jerome's done a remarkable job of branding himself as a savior. But this, it's not equity, it's coercion in a 3-piece suit." The room went quiet. All eyes shifted to Jerome. He took the mic, paused a beat, then leaned forward. "You know what I've never seen in 20 years of building?" he asked. No child ever looked up at a hotel sign and said, "I hope the margins are healthy." He let that sit. What they remember is whether someone looked them in the eye, whether their mother was treated with respect, whether they felt like they belonged. He shifted his gaze directly to Edward. "And if you think ethics are a threat to your bottom line, then maybe the problem isn't the system, it's the soul of the brand." A soft murmur swept the room. Some uncomfortable, some electrified, some silent, but taking notes. After the panel, Jerome stood by the exit, sipping sparkling water. A young woman in her 30s walked up. She wore a navy suit and sharp eyes. "I work for Gold Sky's compliance team," she said quietly. "What you said, that wasn't just a mic drop. It was a mirror. I've watched how we justify things behind closed doors. I just wanted to say thank you." Jerome nodded once. "Keep holding the mirror up," he said. She smiled, then slipped away. An hour later, Jerome headed back to his hotel, but not before taking a detour. He passed the Gold Sky booth, lavish, marble-themed, and currently empty. No foot traffic, no buzz. A sign sat crooked on a velvet stand. "Luxury. Defined by you." He paused, then pulled out his phone. No selfie, no post, just a note to himself. Legacy is not a defense. It's a challenge. That night, in his own hotel room overlooking the harbor, Jerome got a message from Natalie. Summit West just requested to join the index. That leaves Gold Sky as the only holdout. He stared at the screen, then replied, "Let them stay behind. Not everyone gets to come forward." He shut his phone off, stood at the window, and for the first time in days, smiled. Monday, 8 a.m. Jerome sat alone in the boardroom of his corporate HQ in Oakland. No assistants, no coffee, just silence, and a laptop open to a single slide. Ethics isn't an initiative, it's infrastructure. One by one, his senior execs walked in. Some were energized. Others were clearly nervous. They'd seen the headlines, the audits, the terminations. Everyone knew. Today wasn't business as usual. Jerome stood. "Let's get started." He didn't ease in. No pleasantries, no quarterly numbers, just the truth. We built something incredible, but somewhere along the way, we stopped looking people in the eye. He looked around the table. It started small. One employee ignoring a guest, one manager covering it up, one decision to protect a brand instead of a person. And then we woke up, and that became our culture. Silence. Even the AC seemed to hush. "I'm not here to fix it anymore," Jerome continued. "I'm here to rebuild it." He clicked the remote. A new slide popped up. Project House Clean, effective immediately. Phase 1. Staff-wide review. Every employee, top to bottom, would be reviewed under a new internal system called Clear Ethics, not just by supervisors, but by guests, colleagues, and anonymous reviewers. A 360-degree mirror. Phase 2. Ethics-weighted pay. For the first time in company history, performance bonuses wouldn't be just about occupancy rates. They'd be tied directly to verified guest experiences, inclusion, and dignity. Phase 3. Blacklist enforcement. Anyone who had been flagged for repeated guest mistreatment, including Kim, was now on a federal-level hospitality compliance list. No rehiring, no transfers, not in this company, not in any of its partners. One executive, Mark, the VP of Operations, raised his hand. "Jerome, with respect, this is a major operational shift. We could lose people. Good ones." Jerome turned to him, calm but sharp. "If good people leave because treating guests with basic human decency is too much to ask, then we're not losing good people." That shut it down. By noon, every regional GM had been looped in via satellite. By 3 p.m., the internal servers had rolled out the Clear Ethics dashboard to over 80 hotels nationwide. And by 5 p.m., Jerome had only one thing left to do. He pulled out his phone and called Natalie. "Is the system stable?" he asked. "It's already being stress-tested," she replied. 2 properties flagged themselves voluntarily. "Good. Now initiate the final push." That final push? A public letter posted across every platform, printed in hospitality trade magazines, spoken on national TV that same night. "To every guest we failed, I want you to know your dignity was never the problem. Ours was. This isn't a rebranding. This is repentance. We're not just sorry. We're starting over. Jerome D. Wilson, CEO." The response? Explosive. Former guests shared their stories. Some cried, some raged, some simply said, "Finally." But one reply stood out. A handwritten note from a guest who had once been refused a room because her reservation was mysteriously cancelled. It read, "I never expected to hear anything from you. I thought people like me were invisible to people like you. Thank you for seeing us now." Jerome held that note in his hands for a long time. And for the first time in months, he exhaled, not in frustration, but in release. The next morning, he returned to that same hotel in San Francisco. This time, the receptionist stood up the second he walked in. "Mr. Wilson," she said, "welcome back." He smiled softly. "Thank you. Is room 1724 available?" She checked the screen. "Yes, sir. It's waiting for you." He nodded, took the keycard, and turned toward the elevator. But before he walked away, he paused, turned back to her. "And hey," he said, "don't forget to check everyone in like they might own the place." The receptionist blinked, then laughed. "Yes, sir." Jerome stepped into the elevator. Doors closed. Clean slate. 2 weeks after Jerome's public letter dropped, the hospitality world was still spinning. Pundits were calling it the Wilson Reset. Industry blogs were praising it as a blueprint for rebuilding trust. And internally, employees were scrambling to meet the new Clear Ethics standards. But none of it mattered as much as what was about to happen today. Because today, Jerome wasn't sitting in a corner office. He was back at that hotel, back at the same lobby. But this time, he wasn't just visiting, he was holding court. The newly assigned general manager, Tracy Quinn, stood beside him. Tracy had only been in charge for 5 days, but had already cleaned house like a veteran. 3 dismissals, 6 role reassignments, 1 reinstated whistleblower. Jerome had one word for her: effective. "You ready for this?" he asked her quietly. Tracy nodded, born ready. He smiled. "Then, let's bring them in." At exactly 11 o'clock a.m., the guest listening session began. It was Jerome's idea. A first-of-its-kind forum where guests who'd previously filed complaints would be invited back to share what went wrong directly, face-to-face, with the people who now ran the hotel. No scripts, no PR team, no deflection, just truth. The first speaker was a middle-aged Latina woman named Mrs. Rivera, who had once been told her ID didn't look real when checking in with her accent-heavy English. "My kids were watching," she said. "They thought we weren't good enough to stay here. That's the part that broke me." Jerome didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, then wrote something on a card. The second guest, a black college professor, shared how a junior employee insisted she show extra documentation for her prepaid booking right after watching 2 white guests check in without being asked anything. "I knew what it was," she said flatly, "but I didn't have the energy to fight that day. I just went home." Tracy swallowed hard. Jerome didn't flinch. After 7 guests spoke, he finally stood, not from behind a podium, just right there in the open. "You all deserve better," he said. "I'm not going to say we're sorry and call it a day. I'm here to show you what justice looks like." In action, he held up a small stack of cards. "Each of you is receiving a lifetime premier guest status at all our properties. But more importantly, you're being added to our ethics advisory circle, a small group of past guests who now have an actual seat at the table. You'll be helping us rewrite how we define hospitality." The room was quiet for a second. Then one man clapped, then another, then the whole room. But Jerome wasn't done. That afternoon, he called a press conference. This wasn't just about one hotel anymore. Behind him on stage were 6 former guests, now elevated as honorary advisors to the Clear Ethics program. Beside them, Tracy Quinn, now promoted as Regional Ethics Operations Lead. And behind her, a screen displaying a message that would soon go viral. Respect isn't a courtesy, it's a contract. A reporter raised his hand. "Mr. Wilson, why go this far? Most CEOs stop at a statement or maybe firing someone. Why a full rebuild?" Jerome looked at him for a beat before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when we don't. I've lived it. I've been ignored in my own hotel. I've been told to wait. I've watched people assume I didn't belong." He paused. "And I have power. So what about the people who don't?" That night, in a private moment with Tracy, she asked him something that had been on her mind for days. "Jerome, do you ever regret showing up that night, just as a guest?" He looked out the window for a long time, then shook his head. "Not once. That night reminded me who I was. Not a CEO, a guest, a black man, a father, a human being." He turned to her. "That's who we build for now." Back at his penthouse suite, Jerome sat at the edge of the bed. The same room that had once been denied to him, now redesigned, now reclaimed. He looked around. No champagne, no celebration, just quiet, peaceful, like something had finally landed inside him. He picked up his phone, opened a new note and wrote, "Build systems that remember what it's like to be ignored." so they never let it happen again. He saved it, turned off the lights, and slept, for the first time in weeks, with no weight on his chest. 3 months later, the lobby of the Lexington Crown looked different now. Not in the furniture, not in the lighting, but in the atmosphere. The front desk stood taller, the staff stood prouder. The culture? You could feel it in the way they said hello. It didn't feel trained, it felt earned. And right now, the lobby was buzzing. But not because of a scandal, because of a ribbon that was about to be cut. Jerome stood at the center of it all, in a tailored navy suit, no fanfare, no script, just him. Behind him was a brass plaque, the Dignity Suite, dedicated to every guest who was ever made to feel like they didn't belong. Next to the plaque stood Mrs. Rivera and Professor Daniels, two of the original guests who once spoke up during the listening session. Today, they weren't guests. They were co-authors of the change. Jerome turned to the small crowd. "No one builds a legacy in a day," he said. "But you can take it back in one." He cut the ribbon. Applause. Some wiped away tears. Later in the suite. Yes, room 1724. Jerome stood quietly at the window. Natalie, on a rare break from legal strategy calls, joined him. She raised a brow. "You really did it." He gave her a look. "We did," she smiled. "You ever think none of this would have happened if Kim hadn't turned you away that night?" Jerome nodded slowly. "I think about it all the time." He paused. "But if the system needed me to be humiliated before it could be rebuilt, then maybe that was the price." Downstairs, a family checked in. A black father, tired from travel. A daughter no older than 10, clinging to her tiny pink suitcase. The front desk agent greeted them with a warm smile. "Mr. Powell, welcome. We've been expecting you. Your daughter's care package is already in your suite." The girl beamed. The father looked surprised. In a good way. "Thank you," he said, almost under his breath. As they walked toward the elevator, the girl looked up and asked, "Daddy, why are you smiling like that?" He chuckled. "Because this hotel feels different." Back in room 1724, Jerome picked up a small journal. One he'd started after that first night. He flipped to the final page and wrote, "Legacy isn't about ownership. It's about what happens to people after they walk through your door." He closed the book, looked out at the city and exhaled. The cycle was complete. If you were Jerome, would you have revealed your identity earlier or waited like he did, like he